My husband forced me to eat instant noodles for 10 years to save for our retirement. But yesterday I found a receipt for a $15,000 Rolex he bought while I was starving. I am sitting on the floor of our freezing apartment because he refuses to turn on the heat, staring at the proof that my entire marriage is a financial scam. My name is Olivia, and for a decade, I believed we were sacrificing together for a future in Portugal. I was wrong. I was sacrificing so he could live a secret double life, while I walked to work in shoes with holes in the soles to save $5. Mark was funneling 70% of my salary into offshore accounts to buy yachts and designer bags for his mother and brother. He looked me in the eye and lectured me about spending $600 on a hairdryer, calling me selfish, while he was wearing a watch worth more than my car. I feel a level of nausea that no amount of screaming can cure. I was not a partner. I was livestock being harvested for cash. Now, I have the evidence that could send him to federal prison, but my hands are shaking so violently I can barely hold the papers. I have lost my youth, my dignity, and my trust to a monster in a tailored suit. I feel like I am drowning in plain sight. Please, I need to know. What would you do if you realized you were just an automated teller machine with a heartbeat? The wine tastes like vinegar and regret. It is a bottle of Charles Shaw, affectionately known as $2 Chuck, though inflation has pushed it closer to $4 now. I am sitting on the floor of an empty luxury apartment in downtown Seattle, watching the relentless Pacific Northwest rain streak against the floor-to-ceiling windows. My name is Olivia Vance. I am 34 years old. I am a senior marketing manager for a tech firm, bringing in a salary of $120,000 a year. By all societal metrics, I am a success. I am a modern, independent woman. Yet, here I am, drinking swill from a chipped coffee mug because I do not own wine glasses. I do not own a sofa. I do not own the very floor I am sitting on. If you were to ask my husband, Mark Vance, he would tell you, we are not poor. We are strategically frugal. We are disciples of the FIRE movement. Financial independence. Retire early. Mark is 36. A financial analyst with eyes that look like cold, blue spreadsheets. He has a plan. He always has a plan. For 10 years. That plan has been my gospel. We were going to retire at 40. We were going to move to the Algarve coast in Portugal. We were going to sip authentic Vinho Verde and laugh about the years we sacrificed. That was the narrative. That was the carrot he dangled in front of my face, like a treat for an obedient mule. But tonight, looking at the gray skyline, I realized something. A mule does not pull the cart because it dreams of the destination. It pulls the cart because it is afraid of the whip. Mark never used a whip. He used logic. He used shame. He used the future to steal my present. It started subtly. A suggestion to cancel cable here. A request to switch to generic brands there. But over a decade, the water temperature rose, and I, the boiling frog, simply adjusted my tolerance. I remember the night the water finally started to scald me. It was 6 months ago. Mark's 36th birthday. Most wives in my tax bracket would take their husbands to Canlis or the Pink Door for a celebration. Not us. Mark had forbidden dining out 3 years ago. Restaurant markup is a tax on stupidity. Olivia, he had said, tapping his calculator. Why pay $50 for a steak we can sear at home for $12? So, there we were. Wednesday night. The apartment thermostat was set to 62 degrees because heating is expensive. I was wearing 2 sweaters and thick wool socks that had a hole in the big toe. I looked across our small, second-hand IKEA table at Mark. Dinner was ram, not the artisanal kind with rich broth and pork belly. This was the 25-cent brick of dried noodles, sodium packet included. I had splurged and added a soft boiled egg and some green onions. Happy birthday, honey, I said, my voice sounding small in the chilly room. Mark slurped a noodle, his eyes not meeting mine. He was focused on his tablet, checking the aftermarket close on the Standard & Poor's 500. The egg was a nice touch, he murmured. But did we need the green onions? They rot so fast if you do not use the whole bunch. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. I am a marketing manager. I thought, I manage $1 million ad budget. Why am I apologizing for a 50-cent vegetable? I just wanted it to be special, I said, forcing a smile. It is your birthday. Mark finally looked up. He was handsome in a severe way. Buzz-cut hair, sharp jawline, efficient movements. He wiped his mouth with a cloth napkin. Paper towels were a waste of money, and leaned back. The best gift you can give me, ever, Liv, is sticking to the plan. Every dollar we save today is $10 in Portugal. I nodded, conditioned to agree. I know, but I actually did get you something. The air in the room shifted. Mark went still. We had a no gifts policy. Gifts were consumerist traps. I reached under the table and pulled out the box. It was heavy, or sleek, and screamed luxury. A Dyson supersonic hairdryer. The price tag was nearly $600. Now, I know what you are thinking. Mark has a buzz cut. He has practically no hair. Why would I buy him a hairdryer? The truth, the pathetic, embarrassing truth, was that I bought it for us. Or rather, I bought it for me, disguised as an appliance for the household. My hair had been thinning for years, brittle from stress, and the cheap drugstore shampoo Mark insisted we buy in bulk. I wanted to feel beautiful. I wanted to feel, just for a moment, that my hard work entitled me to something other than a heavier savings account. I slid the box across the table. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Mark stared at the box. He did not open it. He did not tear the wrapping. He just read the brand name, his face devoid of emotion. Then he looked at me. It was not anger. Anger I could handle. Anger is hot. You can fight fire with fire. This was worse. It was disappointed pity. It was the look a parent gives a child who has wet the bed. Olivia, he said softly. The way he said my name made me feel 2 feet tall. $600. It is an investment, I stammered, my rehearsed lines crumbling. It protects hair health. It lasts for 10 years. If you amortize the cost. Mark held up a hand, silencing me. He stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out at the city lights. I am not mad, he said, his back to me. I am just sad. I work 80 hours a week, crunching numbers so we can be free. I wear shirts until the collars fray. And you? You see my birthday as an excuse to satisfy your own vanity. That is not fair, I whispered. Though I knew he could not hear me, or chose not to, he turned around, his face a mask of tragic martyrdom. Is the goal Portugal, Olivia? Or is the goal looking pretty for strangers who do not care about you? It is Portugal, I lead. Then explain to me how a $600 wind machine gets us to Portugal faster. He walked back to the table and placed his hand gently on the box, as if it were a bomb. Do you know what this money would be worth in 30 years if invested in a low-cost index fund? With a 7% average return. Compounded? No, I murmured, staring at my ramen, the broth now cold and filming over with grease. Nearly $4,500. Mark said, "You did not spend $600, Olivia. You burned $4,500 of our future freedom for a hairdryer." He seethed, a long, weary exhalation that sucked all the oxygen out of the room. "I thought we were partners. I thought you understood the vision. Maybe I failed to teach you properly." Tears pricked my eyes, not tears of defiance, but tears of shame. He was right. Logically, mathematically, he was always right. I was the weak link. I was the impulsive child who could not delay gratification. "I am sorry," I choked out. "I will return it tomorrow." Mark nodded slowly. "Accepting my penance? That would be best. We will put the refund directly into your individual retirement account. We can salvage this mistake." He sat back down and finished his noodles. He did not say thank you. He did not acknowledge the thought behind the gift. He simply resumed eating, satisfied that he had corrected a glitch in his system. I sat there, watching him eat. I looked at the sleek box of the Dyson, the symbol of the luxury I craved, and then I looked at my reflection in the dark window, a woman in old clothes, eating cheap soup, apologizing for spending her own money. That night, lying in bed next to him, shivering because the heat was off, I stared at the ceiling. I felt a strange sensation in my gut. It was not the ramen. It was the first tiny crack in the foundation of the Church of Mark Vance. He had not asked why I wanted it. He had not asked why I felt I needed it. He only cared about the math, and for the first time in 10 years, the math did not feel like it was adding up. The silence in our apartment was not peaceful. It was heavy, like a wool blanket soaked in ice water. For 2 weeks following the birthday incident, Mark enacted a punishment far worse than screaming. He simply erased me. He would walk into a room and look right through my body as if I were a ghost haunting his hallway. He made his own coffee in the morning, deliberately grinding just enough beans for 1 cup. When I asked him a question, he would pause for 3 seconds, staring at a spot on the wall just above my left ear, before delivering a one-word answer. Yes, no, fine. This was the penance for my vanity. I had sinned against the god of compound interest, and now I had to earn my way back into paradise. I told him I had returned the Dyson. That was the first direct lie I had ever told my husband in 10 years of marriage. I said the customer service line was long and humiliating, that the refund would hit my account in 5 to 7 business days. Mark had nodded, his eyes scanning the spreadsheet on his laptop, not bothering to check if I was telling the truth. He trusted my submission implicitly, but I had not returned it. The hairdryer was buried deep in the back of the linen closet, wrapped inside an old, moth-eaten towel that we were supposed to cut into rags. Every time I opened that closet to get a fresh sheet, my heart hammered against my ribs. I felt like a criminal harboring a fugitive. I was terrified he would find it. Yet the thought of that sleek, gunmetal gray machine hidden amidst our decay gave me a tiny, dark thrill. It was a secret, and in a marriage where every penny was accounted for on a shared Excel sheet, a secret felt like oxygen to make up for the imaginary deficit I had caused. I threw myself into my work. I stayed at the office until 8 in the evening, taking on extra freelance consulting for a startup on the weekends. I needed to show Mark that I was an asset, not a liability. I needed him to look at me with that approving nod again, the one that made me feel safe. Then, on a Tuesday morning in mid-November, the atmosphere shifted. Mark appeared in the kitchen wearing his charcoal travel suit. It was the one expensive thing he owned, justified as a necessary uniform for client meetings. "I am going to Chicago for 3 days," he announced, adjusting his tie in the reflection of the microwave. I blinked, surprised. Usually, his travel schedule was on the shared calendar weeks in advance. "Last-minute crisis with the portfolio," he said, anticipating my question before I could ask it. "The firm needs me to put out a fire. I will be back Friday night. Do not turn up the heat while I am gone." I watched him leave. He did not kiss me goodbye. He did not even wave. The door clicked shut, and the lock engaged with a sterile thud. For the first time in 14 days, my shoulders dropped. I let out a breath I felt I had been holding since his birthday. The apartment was still cold, but without his critical gaze tracking my movements, it felt less like a prison cell. I decided to deep clean. It was a nervous habit. Whenever I felt my life spiraling out of control, I scrubbed baseboards until my knuckles bled. It was my way of creating order. I started in the kitchen, scouring the grout, then moved to the living room. By late afternoon, I stood before the closed door of the second bedroom. This was Mark's home office. It was the only room in the house I was implicitly forbidden to enter. Mark claimed he handled sensitive financial data for high-net-worth clients and could not risk me disturbing his filing system. I respected that. I respected his privacy, even though I had none of my own. But today, the thought of dust gathering on his baseboards nagged at me. If I cleaned it perfectly, if I made the room spotless for his return, maybe he would see how hard I was trying. Maybe he would forgive me. I turned the knob. It was unlocked. The room was dark. Heavy blackout curtains were drawn tight against the afternoon gray. I flipped the switch, and the single overhead bulb illuminated the space. It was Spartan, a large mahogany desk that looked too big for the room, a high-back leather chair, and a wall of bookshelves crammed with binders and financial textbooks. I stepped inside, armed with my microfiber cloth and a bottle of vinegar solution. The air in here was different. It did not smell like the rest of the house, which usually smelled of damp plaster and boiled vegetables. This room had a scent I could not quite place. It was rich, earthy, and strangely masculine. It smelled like cedarwood and something faint, sweet, and smoky. I frowned. Mark did not smoke. He despised smokers. He called it the most inefficient way to burn money and health simultaneously. I assumed the smell must be coming from the old leather chair or perhaps the wood polish he used. I began to dust. I started with the desk, wiping around his dual monitors and the strict alignment of his pens. Everything was precise. Everything was controlled. I moved to the bookshelves. My hand brushed along the spines of books on macroeconomics and tax law. I stood on my tiptoes to reach the top shelf, where a row of thick, identical black binders stood like soldiers. I wanted to wipe the dust off the top of them. I stretched my arm up, the damp cloth in my hand. My fingers grazed the top of the binders, but as I swept the cloth across, I bumped into something that was not a book. It was heavy. I lost my balance for a split second. My hand jerking reflexively, the object tipped forward. I tried to catch it, but I was too slow. A large, dark wooden box tumbled off the top shelf. It hit the edge of the desk with a sickening crack before sliding down the gap between the heavy desk and the wall. My heart stopped. Panic flooded my veins like ice water. If I had broken something, if I had damaged his property, the silent treatment would be the least of my worries. He would look at me with that calm, logical disappointment that cut deeper than any knife. I am so stupid, I whispered to myself, dropping to my knees. I am so clumsy and stupid. I lay on my stomach, squinting into the dark, dusty crawl space behind the desk. I could see the box. It had landed on its side. It looked intact. Thankfully, it was a beautiful box, made of polished wood, far too elegant for a man who refused to buy paper napkins. I reached my arm into the gap, straining to grasp the corner of the box. My fingers brushed against it, and I dragged it out, along with a few dust bunnies. I sat up, holding the object in my lap. It was not a file box. It was a humidor, a high-end cigar storage box. My confusion deepened. Why would Mark have this? Maybe it was a gift from a client that he planned to sell? That would make sense. Mark sold everything that had value, but as I turned the box over to check for scratches, the latch clicked. The fall must have jarred the lock loose. The lid popped open just an inch. I should have closed it. I should have put it back on the shelf, wiped away my fingerprints, and left the room. That was what the obedient wife would do. That was what the Olivia who wanted to retire in Portugal would do. But the smell wafted out, that rich, intoxicating scent of tobacco and leather. And underneath the smell, I saw paper, not the stark white of spreadsheet printouts, but the glossy sheen of receipts and the creamy texture of high-end stationery. My heart began to beat a different rhythm now. It was no longer the fast drum of fear. It was the slow, heavy thud of dread. I looked at the open crack of the box, just a peek. A voice in my head whispered, "Just to make sure nothing inside is broken." I lifted the lid. The only light in the room came from the 60-watt bulb overhead, casting long, sharp shadows against the rows of binders. The humidor sat open on my lap, a heavy wooden block that felt cold against my thighs. The smell of cedar and cured tobacco was overwhelming now. It was a rich, arrogant scent. It smelled like the kind of life Mark sneered at when we watched movies. The kind of life he called wasteful and shallow. I stared at the contents. There were no cigars inside. Instead, the velvet-lined interior was being used as a safe for paper, not the crinkled, faded receipts from the grocery store that Mark made me scan into our expense tracker every Sunday. These were different. My hand trembled as I reached for the first document. It was a folded piece of thick, creamy cardstock. I unfolded it slowly, the paper crinkling in the silence of the empty apartment. It was a membership invoice. The logo at the top was embossed in gold leaf. The Grand Havana Room, New York City. I blinked, trying to make the letters make sense. New York? Mark went to New York 4 times a year for client consultations. He always complained about the misery of the budget airlines and the cramped capsule hotels he stayed in to save the firm money. I read the line items. Initiation fee, $3,000. Annual dues, $2,000. Locker rental, $500. My breath hitched. $5,500. That was the exact amount we had saved in our emergency medical fund last year. That was the money Mark had said we could not touch when I needed a root canal. He had made me go to a dental school clinic instead, where a nervous student had taken 3 hours to drill into my tooth while I cried silently in the chair. He said we could not afford a private dentist. He said the pain was temporary, but savings were forever. I looked at the date on the invoice. It was dated 3 years ago. He had been a member for 3 years. A wave of dizziness hit me. I placed the invoice on the floor and reached back into the box. My fingers brushed against something stiff. It was a receipt from a place called Paul Stewart. I knew the name only from magazines. It was a high-end menswear store. The receipt listed a cashmere overcoat, 2 silk ties, and a pair of Italian leather loafers. Total, $4,200. I looked down at my own feet. I was wearing socks with a hole in the heel. My running shoes by the door were 4 years old. The soles worn so thin I could feel every pebble on the sidewalk. I had asked for new shoes last Christmas. Mark had told me to buy shoe glue and fix the sole myself. He has a coat. I whispered to the empty room. He has a $4,000 coat. Where is it? He must keep it somewhere else. Maybe at his office. Maybe in a storage locker I did not know about. The realization made my skin crawl. He had a secret wardrobe. He had a costume he put on when he was not playing the role of the suffering martyr with me. But the worst was yet to come. At the bottom of the box, beneath a stack of smaller receipts for steak dinners and single malt scotch tastings, there was a small, square envelope. It was heavy, made of textured gray paper. Inside was a certificate of authenticity and a sales receipt. I pulled it out. The paper felt like money. Rolex. The words seemed to float off the page and slap me across the face. Model, Submariner date, reference number 126610LN. Purchaser, Mark Vance. Price, $15,200. I stopped breathing. The air in the room seemed to vanish. I read the number again. $15,200. It was not possible. It simply was not possible. We tracked every cent. I knew the price of a gallon of milk at 3 different grocery stores. I knew how to split a 2-ply tissue in half to make it last longer. How could $15,000 disappear without me noticing? Then I looked at the payment method. It was not our joint checking account. It was not our primary credit card. Payment method, Visa ending in 4492. I did not know a card ending in 4492. It was a ghost card, a secret line of credit, but it was the date on the receipt that shattered me. October 12th. I stared at the date, my mind racing backward, rewinding the calendar to 2 months ago. October 12th. What was I doing on October 12th? The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. October 12th was the day our car broke down. The radiator in our 15-year-old Honda Civic had exploded on the highway. I had called Mark, panicked, stranded on the side of the interstate in the rain. He had screamed at me over the phone. He had told me a tow truck was too expensive. He made me wait 3 hours in the cold for a friend of his who had a flatbed trailer. When I finally got home, freezing and shaking, Mark had sat me down at the kitchen table. He told me the repair would cost $600. He told me that because of this unforeseen disaster, we had to tighten our belts. He canceled our internet service that night. He told me we would have to eat from the pantry for the rest of the month. That night, October 12th, I ate a can of beans that had expired 2 years prior. It tasted metallic and mushy. I ate it cold because using the microwave wasted electricity. I sat in the dark, eating cold, expired beans, crying because I felt so guilty for breaking the car. I felt like a burden. I felt like I was the reason we were not in Portugal yet. And on that same day, at that same hour, Mark was standing in a boutique, swiping a card for a $15,000 watch. He was not angry about the car because of the money. He was angry because the repair bill cut into his play money. A sound escaped my throat. It was a guttural, animal noise. I looked around the room. The binders on the shelves suddenly looked like tombstones. The financial independence charts on the wall looked like prison bars. He did not want to retire early. The realization washed over me, cold and absolute. There was no Portugal. There was no vineyard. There was no us. Mark loved his job. He loved the power. He loved the status, the fire movement, the extreme frugality, the poverty he forced me to live in. It was not a strategy. It was a game. It was a control mechanism. He was hoarding my salary, 70% of our combined income, and using it to fund a secret life of luxury for himself. While I lived like a beggar in my own home, I looked at the Rolex receipt again. $15,000. That was 3 years of my personal allowance. That was 10 years of missed vacations. That was every coffee I did not buy, every heater I did not turn on, every time I sewed a button back onto a shirt instead of buying a new one. I felt a sudden, violent lurch in my stomach. The bile rose up my throat. Acidic and hot, I scrambled to my feet, the papers scattering across the floor like dead leaves. I barely made it to the hallway bathroom before my knees hit the tile. I retched into the toilet bowl. There was nothing in my stomach but the cheap tea I had drank for lunch and the acid of betrayal. My body was rejecting the truth. It was too big, too grotesque to swallow. I heaved until my ribs ached, gasping for air between spasms. I gripped the cold porcelain of the toilet bowl, my knuckles turning white. How could he? The question was not rhetorical. I genuinely wanted to know the mechanics of a human soul capable of this. How could he watch me eat cold beans while wearing a $15,000 watch? How could he lecture me about a $600 hairdryer when he had a $5,000 cigar membership? He did not just steal my money. He stole my reality. He stole my dignity. I flushed the toilet and sat back against the bathroom wall, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror above the sink. My face was pale, my eyes red-rimmed and hollow. My hair was frizzy because I did not have a good hairdryer. My skin was dry because I used generic soap. I looked like a victim. I looked exactly like what he wanted me to be. Small, tired, and manageable. I stood up slowly. My legs felt shaky, like I was walking on the deck of a ship in a storm. I walked back into the office. The papers were still on the floor. The smoking gun, the bloody knife. I knelt down and began to gather them. I did not put them back in the box. I needed them. These were not just receipts. They were ammunition. I stacked them neatly. The invoice for the cigar club, the receipt for the cashmere coat, the certificate for the Rolex. My hands were no longer trembling. A strange, cold clarity was settling over me, replacing the shock. It was the freezing point of sadness, where tears turn into ice. Mark Vance thought he was a genius. He thought he was the master of the universe, moving pieces on a chessboard while I cleaned the board. But he had made a mistake, a fatal calculation error. He had forgotten that even a boiling frog eventually dies, or it jumps. I looked at the Rolex receipt one last time. $15,200. I folded it carefully and slipped it into the pocket of my jeans. I am not going to ask him about it, I thought. Asking him gives him a chance to lie. Asking him gives him a chance to spin the narrative, to use his logic, to twist my brain until I believe that up is down and black is white. No, I picked up the wooden humidor and placed it back on the shelf. hiding it behind the binders exactly as I had found it. I wiped the dust from the desk where the box had fallen. I erased my footprints from the carpet. I turned off the light and closed the door. When Mark came home, he would find a clean house. He would find a submissive wife. He would find everything exactly as he left it, except me. I walked into the kitchen and poured the rest of the cheap wine down the sink. I did not want to be numb anymore. I wanted to be sharp. I sat down at the kitchen table, in the dark, and waited for the anger to finish hardening into something useful. Friday evening arrived with the heavy, damp chill typical of a Seattle November. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands clasped tightly together on top of the cold formica surface. The apartment was silent, except for the rhythmic ticking of the cheap wall clock Mark had bought at a garage sale 5 years ago. Tick, tick, tick. Each second felt like a countdown to an explosion. In front of me, arranged in a neat, undeniable row, were the 3 pieces of paper that proved my marriage was a lie. The cigar club invoice, the receipt for the cashmere coat, the certificate for the Rolex Submariner. I heard the heavy thud of the front door opening, the sound of keys jingling, the distinct, confident footsteps of a man who owns his world. Mark walked into the kitchen. He looked tired but impeccable in his suit. He carried his leather briefcase in one hand and his garment bag in the other. He stopped when he saw me. He did not smile. He did not ask how my week was. His eyes dropped immediately to the table. He stared at the papers. I waited for the panic. I waited for his face to crumble, for him to drop his bags and stammer out an excuse. I waited for the guilt, but it never came. Mark slowly set his briefcase down. He hung his garment bag over the back of a chair. He walked to the fridge, poured himself a glass of filtered water, and took a long, measured sip. Only then did he turn to face me. "You went into my office," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was a statement, not a question. I stood up, my legs shaking. I pointed a trembling finger at the papers. $15,000. Mark, you spent $15,000 on a watch. You spent $5,000 to smoke cigars. Meanwhile, I am eating expired beans. I am walking around in shoes with holes in the soles. I felt the tears hot and stinging in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You told me we were broke. I choked out. You told me we had to sacrifice for Portugal. You lied to me. You are a liar and a thief. Mark looked at me. He tilted his head slightly to the side, like a scientist observing a rat that had failed a maze. He did not look angry. He looked disappointed. He looked bored. "Sit down, Olivia," he said calmly. "I am not sitting down," I screamed. "I want an explanation." "Sit down," he repeated, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with a quiet command that triggered a decade of conditioning in my brain. I sat. I hated myself for it, but I sat. Mark pulled out a chair opposite me. He reached out and picked up the Rolex certificate. He studied it for a moment, then placed it back down, smoothing the edges with his thumb. "You see a watch? Olivia, that is your problem. That is why you will always be poor in your mind, no matter how much money you earn." "What are you talking about?" I whispered. He leaned forward, locking his eyes onto mine. His gaze was intense, hypnotic. "This is not a watch," he said softly. "This is an asset. Do you know the difference between an asset and a liability?" I opened my mouth, but he cut me off. "No, you do not. Because if you did, you would not be having a tantrum right now. A Dyson hairdryer is a liability. You buy it for $600. And the moment you open the box, it is worth $50. It is plastic. It is trash. It is money set on fire. He tapped the Rolex paper with his index finger. This, however, is a store of value. A steel sports Rolex is harder to get than gold. I bought this for $15,000. Today, on the secondary market, it is worth $22,000. I did not spend money. Olivia, I made $7,000 simply by wearing it on my wrist. It is liquid capital. It is an investment portfolio that tells time. My mind reeled. He sounded so sure, so logical. And the cigar club? I asked, my voice wavering. Is smoking cigars an investment too? Mark sighed. A long, weary sound of patience being tested. It is called networking. Olivia, it is called access. Do you think million-dollar deals are signed in the break room over stale coffee? No, they are signed in places like the Grand Havana Room. The membership fee is $5,000. The commission I made from the client I met there last month was $40,000. He leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. I am playing chess. Olivia, you are playing checkers. Everything I do, every move I make, is calculated to maximize our net worth. I endure the smoke, which I hate, to build relationships. I wear the watch to signal success to potential investors. I do this for us. I do this so we can go to Portugal in 5 years instead of 15. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and scorn. And what do? You sneak into my office. You invade my privacy. You interpret data you do not understand with your emotional, consumerist brain. You see spending where there is investing. You are so short-sighted. I stared at him. The anger that had been boiling in my blood began to cool, replaced by a creeping, suffocating fog of doubt. Was he right? I knew nothing about high finance. I was just a marketing manager. I dealt with colors and slogans, not asset appreciation and yield curves. Maybe I was being stupid. Maybe I was looking at this all wrong, but you let me eat the expired beans, I said weakly. On the day the car broke down, you said we had no money. Mark shook his head sadly. Cash flow and net worth are two different things. Olivia, our liquidity was low that month because I had just moved capital into these assets. I made us eat beans to teach us discipline, to remind us that comfort is the enemy of progress. I ate the beans too. Did I not? He had eaten the beans right next to me. I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. 5 minutes ago, I was the victim. Now, I felt like the villain. I felt like the ungrateful, ignorant wife who was sabotaging her brilliant husband's grand plan. He was doing all this for us. He was making $40,000 in commissions. He was turning watches into profits. And I was complaining about shoes. I looked down at the table. The papers no longer looked like evidence of a crime. They looked like proof of my own incompetence. I did not know, I stammered. Of course you did not know, Mark said, his voice softening, becoming gentle again. Because you never ask. You just assume. You just react. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His skin was warm. I forgive you, Olivia, he said. The words hung in the air. He forgave me. He forgave me for finding out he spent $20,000 while I starved. I am trying to build an empire for us, he whispered. I need a partner, not a spy. Can you be a partner? Tears spilled down my cheeks now. Tears of relief. Tears of shame. I am sorry. I sobbed. I am so sorry. Mark, I was just scared. I thought you were leaving me behind. Mark squeezed my hand. Never. It is you and me against the world. But you have to trust me. You have to let me handle the money. You are too emotional for the big picture. I nodded, wiping my eyes. You are right. I am sorry. He stood up and gathered the papers. I will put these back, he said, and we will never speak of this again. Tonight, as a treat, you can turn the heat up to 65 degrees. He smiled at me, a benevolent, gracious smile. Thank you, I whispered. I watched him walk out of the kitchen, heading toward his office with the evidence of his betrayal tucked safely under his arm. I sat alone in the cold kitchen, feeling a profound sense of relief. He was not cheating. He was not stealing. He was investing. He was a genius. And I was just a silly, emotional woman who needed to be led. I actually believed him. For that night, and for the next few weeks, I actually believed him. It makes me sick to tell you this now. It makes me want to reach back through time and shake that woman at the table until her teeth rattle. But you have to understand, gaslighting is not just lying. It is surgery. It is a lobotomy performed without anesthesia. He did not just change the facts. He replaced my brain with his own. I went to bed that night feeling lucky to have a husband who was smart enough to save me from myself. I did not know it then, but that was the last night I would ever sleep soundly. The coffee shop was 3 blocks from my office, a place Mark would never set foot in because they charged $5 for a latte. I sat in the back corner, my hands wrapped around the warm paper cup, constantly checking the door. I felt like an adulterer. But my illicit affair was with the truth. Sarah slid into the booth opposite me. She was sharp, tailored, and radiated the kind of no-nonsense energy that came from 10 years of practicing family law. She was the friend Mark had slowly cut out of my life, calling her a bad influence because she liked expensive brunches. I told her everything. I told her about the Dyson, the ramen, the humidor, the Rolex, and the lecture Mark had given me about assets and liabilities. I recited his logic perfectly, waiting for her to nod and agree that I was financially illiterate. Sarah did not nod. She stared at me, her face unreadable. "Olivia," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Listen to me very carefully." I leaned in. "If these are investments for your shared future, why are they not in a joint trust? Why is the watch not insured under the homeowner's policy? Why is the club membership in his name alone?" He said, "It is for networking." I whispered, defending him out of habit. He said he is playing chess. Sarah slammed her hand on the table. It was not loud, but it made me jump. He is playing chess, Olivia, but you are not his partner. You are the pawn he is sacrificing to protect his king. In the eyes of the law, a watch bought on a secret credit card is hidden artifice. If he divorces you tomorrow, that watch walks away on his wrist. That club membership stays with him. You get half of a savings account that I guarantee is much smaller than you think. Her words were like ice water splashed on a drunk. The fog of Mark's logic began to dissipate. "Go home," Sarah said. "Check your joint accounts. Check the beneficiaries on his life insurance. If he is building an empire for us, as he claims, your name should be on the cornerstone." I walked home in a daze. The rain had stopped, leaving the Seattle streets gray and slick. When I got to the apartment, it was empty. Mark was still at work. I went straight to the laptop we shared. I navigated to the bank portal for our primary high-yield savings account, the one where 70% of my paycheck was deposited every 2 weeks. I typed in the password, Portugal 2030. The screen flashed red. Incorrect password. I frowned. I typed it again. Slower this time. Portugal 2030. Incorrect password. Account locked after too many attempts. My stomach dropped. I tried the investment account. Locked. I tried the utility bill portal. Locked. He had changed them. Sometime between his lecture on Friday night and today, he had locked the digital gates. He had sensed that I was waking up, and he had secured the perimeter. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the blood drain from my face. Sarah was right. This was not a partnership. It was a dictatorship. The front door opened. Mark burst in. He was not calm and collected like usual. He was manic. His tie was loosened, his eyes wide and feverish. He looked like a man possessed. "Olivia," he shouted, throwing his keys on the counter. "Great news. Incredible news." I stood up, closing the laptop instinctively. "What is it?" "I just got off the phone with a guy from the club, an insider. There is a new cryptocurrency launching at midnight. It is a pre-sale, guaranteed 10 times return in 48 hours. 10 times. "Olivia," he grabbed my shoulders, his fingers digging into my flesh. "We need liquidity. Now, I need you to authorize a transfer from the emergency fund." I stared at him. The emergency fund held $50,000. It was the only money we had that was liquid. It was for cancer. It was for a house fire. "How much?" I asked. "All of it," he said breathlessly. $50,000. We put in 50. We pull out $500,000 by Friday. Then we are done. Portugal next month. Imagine it, Olivia. No more working. No more saving. Freedom. He was selling me the dream again. The carrot. But this time, I looked at the carrot and saw the hook. "No," I said. Mark froze. The smile vanished from his face instantly. "What did you say?" I said no. "Mark, that is our emergency fund. It is not for gambling on magic internet money." His face darkened. "It was not gambling. It is leverage. Do not be stupid. Olivia, I need your authorization code. The bank requires 2-factor authentication from your phone. Give it to me." I took a step back. I thought about the Rolex. I thought about the locked accounts. "I am not giving you the money," I said, my voice shaking but my feet planted. "And I want the passwords to the accounts. All of them. Tonight." Mark looked at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. Then the mask slipped. For 10 years, I had seen Mark, the martyr, Mark, the strict teacher, Mark, the logical robot. I had never seen Mark, the monster. His face twisted into a snarl. His skin turned a mottled red. "You ungrateful, parasitic bitch," he screamed. He spun around and grabbed the nearest object. It was the ceramic mug I had been drinking water from earlier. It was a cheap promotional mug I got for free at a conference. He hurled it across the room. It smashed against the wall just inches from my head. Shards of ceramic exploded outward, raining down on the floor like shrapnel. I gasped, covering my mouth with my hand. Mark stood there, heaving, his chest rising and falling. He did not look sorry. He looked dangerous. "I work myself to death for you," he roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I carry the mental load. I make the decisions. You just earn the paycheck, but I build the wealth. And you think you have the right to tell me no? It is my money. It is all my money." The silence that followed was deafening. He had said the quiet part out loud. "It is my money, not ours. His." He looked at the shattered mug on the floor. Then he looked at the flat-screen television, the one expensive item we owned. He did not smash that. He did not smash his laptop. He smashed the free mug, even in his blind rage. He was calculating the cost. He looked back at me, his eyes cold and hard. "Give me the code, Olivia, or get out." I looked at the shards on the floor. I looked at the man I had shared a bed with for a decade. I did not give him the code. I turned around, walked into the bedroom, and locked the door. I pushed the dresser in front of it. I sat on the bed in the dark, clutching my phone, listening to him pace back and forth in the hallway like a caged tiger. I did not cry. I was past crying. The fear was there, cold and sharp in my belly. But underneath the fear, something else was waking up. He had shown me his hand. He did not want a partner. He wanted a financier, and he was willing to burn everything down if he did not get his way. Sarah was right. I was in danger, not just financial danger. I looked at the phone in my hand. I had a decision to make. I could surrender, give him the code, and buy peace for another few months. Or I could go to war. I heard Mark kick the bedroom door. "You will regret this," he shouted through the wood. "You are throwing away millions." I lay down, curling into a ball. "No, Mark," I whispered to the darkness. "I am saving myself." The morning after Mark threw the mug at my head, the apartment felt like a tomb. He had left for work before I woke up, leaving a note on the kitchen counter where the ceramic shards had been. The note was written on the back of a utility envelope. It did not say sorry. It did not say I love you. It was a list. Items to liquidate for cash flow. Old espresso machine, your grandmother's silverware set, the camping gear we never use, the box of electronics in the storage closet, since you refused to authorize the transfer for the crypto launch. We missed the window. I calculate a lost opportunity cost of $200,000. We need to make up the deficit, get it done by the weekend. I stared at the note. He wanted me to sell my grandmother's silverware. It was the only thing I had left of her, a set of tarnished sterling silver that I kept wrapped in velvet. To Mark, it was just melted metal, waiting to be converted into a digit on a screen. I moved through the apartment like a zombie. I felt heavy, as if gravity had doubled overnight. I went to the storage closet in the hallway. It was a cramped, dusty space filled with the detritus of a life lived in fear of spending. I pulled out the box of electronics. It was a graveyard of obsolete technology, tangled cords, old routers, broken remotes. Mark never threw anything away. He hoarded trash with the same intensity he hoarded money, convinced that one day a video graphics array cable from 2005 would be useful. I dug through the wires, looking for anything that might fetch $5 on eBay. My hand brushed against a cold glass surface at the bottom of the box. I pulled it out. It was an iPad, an old model, heavy and thick, with a cracked screen corner. Mark had upgraded to a new tablet 3 years ago and told me this one was dead. He said the battery was fried and the processor was toast. I pressed the power button, expecting nothing. A low battery icon flashed on the screen. It was not dead. It was just sleeping. I felt a strange compulsion. I walked back to the living room and plugged it into a charger. I sat on the floor, watching the battery icon turn from red to green. 10 minutes later, the Apple logo appeared. The device booted up. I swiped the screen. It was passcode protected. I tried his birthday. Incorrect. I tried our anniversary. Incorrect. I tried the date of his college graduation. Incorrect. Then I paused. I thought about Mark's ego. I thought about how he saw himself. He saw himself as the provider, the king, the one who held the keys to the kingdom. I typed in MARK1. The screen unlocked. I let out a shaky breath. I was in. The iPad immediately connected to the apartment Wi-Fi. A flurry of notifications began to ping. Emails, calendar updates, and then a notification from the Photos app. iCloud syncing. 1,200 new items. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew I should put it down. I knew that whatever I found in here would hurt me. But I had to look. I had to know if there was someone else. Was there a woman? Was there a secret family in another state? Was there a reason he needed $15,000 for a watch? I tapped the photos icon. The screen filled with thumbnails. I scrolled to the bottom, to the most recent uploads. They were dated from last week, taken on his current phone and synced to this old device via the cloud. There were no nudes. There were no pictures of a blonde woman in a hotel room. There were pictures of a boat, a large, white pontoon boat docked on a shimmering blue lake. The sun was shining. People were laughing, holding glasses of champagne. I zoomed in. I recognized the woman in the center of the frame. It was Linda, Mark's mother. She was wearing a large sun hat and a white linen dress. On her shoulder hung a quilted black bag with a gold chain. A Chanel classic flap bag. I knew the price because I had once looked at it in a magazine and Mark had laughed at me for 10 minutes. It cost $10,000. Next to her was Mark's brother, Jason, who had been unemployed for 5 years. Jason, who Mark claimed was struggling and needed our prayers. In the photo, Jason was holding a thick cigar in one hand and steering the boat with the other. He was wearing a Rolex, not the Submariner Mark had bought, a different one, a Datejust with a blue face. I swiped to the next photo. It was a dinner table, not a kitchen table with ramen and expired beans. A restaurant table covered in white cloth. There were platters of seafood, lobster tails, oysters, thick cuts of steak that looked like butter. Bottles of wine stood like sentinels between the plates. I looked at the date on the photo, July 4th. On July 4th, Mark had told me he had to work late. He had told me to stay home and not waste gas driving to see fireworks. I had spent the holiday alone, eating a peanut butter sandwich, watching the neighbors' fireworks from our balcony. Mark was not working. He was with them. I scrolled back further. January. While I was shivering in our apartment with the heat turned off, wearing 2 sweaters, Mark's parents were in Florida. There were photos of them on a golf course. Mark's father was driving a brand new golf cart. December, Christmas. We had agreed not to exchange gifts to save money. Mark had given me a card he made out of printer paper. In the photo album titled Family Christmas, there was a tree, a massive 12-foot tree covered in gold ornaments. Underneath it were piles of boxes wrapped in silver paper. I saw Mark in the photo. He was smiling, a genuine, warm smile I had not seen in years. He was handing a set of car keys to his younger sister, Emily. The next photo showed Emily screaming with joy next to a white convertible Mustang. I dropped the iPad. It landed on the carpet with a soft thud. I could not breathe. The air in the room felt too thin. He did not have a mistress. He did not have a gambling problem. He was the golden child. He was the benevolent benefactor. He was the rich, a successful son who showered his family with luxury. He funded their retirements. He bought their cars. He paid for their vacations. And who paid for it? I did. Olivia Vance, the woman eating 25-cent noodles, The woman wearing shoes with holes in them. The woman who was denied a $600 hairdryer because it would ruin our future. Every dollar he squeezed out of me, every penny he shamed me into saving, was not going into a vault for our retirement. It was a direct transfer from my misery to their luxury. I was not his partner. I was his livestock. I was the dairy cow he milked until I bled, so he could sell the cream to his real family. I thought about Jason's Rolex. I thought about Linda's Chanel bag. I thought about the lobster. I remembered a conversation from 3 years ago. Mark had told me his mother needed surgery for her hip, but insurance would not cover it. He asked if we could delay our vacation fund to help her. I had said yes instantly. I had worked overtime for 3 months to replenish that fund. There was no surgery. There was never a surgery. That money bought the boat. A sound ripped out of my throat. It was a wail, a raw, ugly sound of pure devastation. I curled up on the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I felt sick, physically, violently sick. I had sacrificed my youth for him. I had given him my 30s. I had given him my confidence, my joy, my vanity. I had let him convince me that I was broken and wasteful, that I needed to be fixed, but I was not broken. I was being harvested. I looked at the iPad again. The screen was still glowing. A picture of Mark and his father clinking crystal glasses of whiskey. The caption read, "To the provider, proud of you, son." Proud. They were proud of him. He was their hero, and to be their hero, he had to be my tormentor. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was not just greed. It was a specific, targeted malice. He did not just want the money. He wanted the control. He enjoyed watching me squirm over the price of green onions while he bought convertibles for his sister. It made him feel powerful. It made him feel like a god, deciding who ate steak and who ate slop. I stood up. My legs were shaking so hard I had to grab the edge of the sofa. I walked to the kitchen. I looked at the note he had left. "Sell your grandmother's silverware." He wanted me to sell the last piece of my history to pay for his brother's next jet ski rental. I picked up the note. I crumpled it in my hand until my nails cut into my palm. "I am not selling the silverware, Mark," I whispered to the empty room. I walked back to the iPad. I needed evidence. I needed every single photo. I needed to document the theft of my life. I sat down and began to take screenshots. I emailed them to a secret email address I created right there on the spot. Send, send, send. With every photo I forwarded, a piece of the old Olivia died. The Olivia who wanted to please him. The Olivia who believed in the FIRE movement. The Olivia who thought she was the problem. She was dead, and in her place, something cold and hard was beginning to form. Something that felt a lot like the steel of the Rolex he loved so much. He wanted a return on investment. He wanted to talk about assets and liabilities. Fine. I looked at the photo of him smiling on the boat. "I am going to become your biggest liability, Mark, and by the time I am done, you will not even have a pot to piss in." The television was casting a flickering blue light across the living room, illuminating Mark's face in intermittent flashes. He was watching a documentary about vineyard estates in the Darro Valley. On the screen, a drone camera swept over terraced hills of lush grapes. Golden in the Portuguese sun, Mark held a glass of water in his hand, swirling it as if it were a fine vintage port. He looked relaxed. He looked like a man who had already won the lottery and was just waiting for the check to clear. I stood in the doorway of the living room. The hallway behind me was dark. In my right hand, I gripped the old iPad. My knuckles were white. The metal casing felt cold and hard. A physical anchor keeping me from floating away into pure hysteria. I watched him for a full minute. I watched the man I had slept beside for 3,650 nights. I watched the man who had measured out my laundry detergent by the cup. I watched the stranger who had stolen my life. Turn it off, I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence of the room like a razor blade. Mark did not jump. He did not look guilty. He simply pressed the mute button on the remote control and turned his head slowly to look at me. His expression was one of mild irritation, like I had interrupted a crucial thought process. I am watching this for research. Olivia, he said, his voice smooth and condescending. Property values in the Douro are projected to rise by 12% next quarter. We need to understand the market if we are going to buy. There is no we, I said, and we are not buying a vineyard. I walked into the room. My legs felt heavy, as if I were wading through waist-deep water. I stopped in front of the television, blocking his view of the golden hills. Move, Olivia, he said, his eyes narrowing. How is the boat? Mark? I asked. The question hung in the air. For a split second, I saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes. Then, it cleared. He took a sip of water. I do not know what you are talking about. The boat? I repeated, my voice rising. The white pontoon boat on Lake Chelan. The one your mother was sitting on while wearing a $10,000 Chanel bag. The one your brother was driving while wearing a Rolex. How was the champagne? Was it crisp? Did it taste better knowing I paid for it? Mark went very still. He placed the glass of water on the coaster on the side table. He did it with precise, deliberate movements. He did not look at me. He looked at his hands. You went through my things again, he said softly. I found the iPad, I said. I saw the photos. I saw the Christmas tree. I saw the Mustang. I saw the dinners. I raised the iPad and threw it. I did not throw it to hurt him. I threw it because I could not hold the weight of the lies anymore. It spun through the air and landed on the sofa cushion next to him with a dull thump. The screen lit up, displaying the photo of him and his father clinking whiskey glasses. Tell me, I demanded, my voice breaking. Tell me why. Just tell me why. Mark picked up the iPad. He looked at the photo. A slow, chilling smile spread across his face. It was not a smile of apology. It was a smile of pride. It is a good picture, he murmured. My dad looked strong there. He finally looked up at me. The mask was gone, the carefully constructed persona of the frugal, suffering martyr had evaporated. In its place sat a man I did not know. His eyes were cold, dead, and terrifyingly arrogant. You want to know why? He asked. He leaned back into the sofa, crossing his legs. He looked like a chief executive officer conducting a performance review for an incompetent employee. Because they deserve it, he said. I blinked. The breath knocked out of me. What? My parents, Mark said, gesturing vaguely to the screen. They raised me. They sacrificed for me. They put me through college. They made me the man I am. They are kings and queens. Olivia, they deserve to live like royalty. And me? I whispered. What about me? I am your wife. Mark let out a short, sharp laugh. It sounded like a bark. You? He looked me up and down with open disgust. You are a resource, Olivia. You are an acquisition. He stood up then. He seemed to grow taller, filling the room with a menacing energy. He walked toward me, and for the first time in my life, I took a step back in fear. Let me explain the economics of our relationship, since you seem to be struggling with the concept, he said. He began to pace around me. circling like a shark. My family is the board of directors. They are the shareholders. You are the labor force. You are the mule that pulls the plow. The mule does not get to sleep in the master's bed. The mule does not get to eat at the banquet table. The mule eats hay and works until it dies. I earned that money. I screamed. 70% of the income in this house came from my paycheck. I worked nights. I worked weekends. I ate ramen. And you were happy to do it, Mark roared back, his face suddenly inches from mine. You were happy because I gave you a purpose. I gave you a goal. Without me, you would have spent it all on shoes and lattes and meaningless garbage. I took your wasted potential and I turned it into legacy. I turned it into a convertible for my sister. I turned it into joy for people who actually matter. People who matter? I choked out. I do not matter? No, he said simply. You do not. He turned his back on me and walked to the window. Looking out at the city rain, you are boring. Olivia, you are plain. You are needy. You have no vision. My sister is vibrant. My mother is elegant. They know how to carry wealth. You look like a frightened mouse even when you are wearing a suit. Why should I waste good money on a bad investment? I felt my knees buckle. The cruelty was so absolute, so pure, that it felt physical. He had not just used me for money. He had despised me the entire time. Every time he kissed me, every time he told me we were a team, he was laughing at me. You are a monster, I whispered. Mark turned around. He looked bored again. I am a pragmatist. He said, and now that you have breached the firewall, the merger is over. He walked over to the side table and opened the drawer. He pulled out a manila envelope. He tossed it onto the coffee table. It slid across the surface and stopped at my feet. What is this? I asked, staring at the envelope. Divorce papers. Mark said, I filed them 4 days ago, the morning after you refused to give me the transfer code. My hands shook as I picked up the envelope. I am taking everything, Mark said calmly. I hired the best forensic accountant in the city 6 months ago. While you were saving coupons for toilet paper, I was moving assets, the joint accounts, empty, the retirement funds, reallocated to offshore trusts in the Cook Islands that you cannot touch. The crypto wallets, untraceable. You cannot do that, I said. It is illegal. It is community property. It is only community property if you can find it. Mark sneered, and you will not find it. On paper, Olivia, we are broke. On paper, I made bad investments and lost it all. On paper, I am a victim of the market. He stepped closer to me, his voice dropping to a whisper. I have $3 million sitting in accounts that do not carry my name. My family is set for generations. And you have nothing. You have your hole-ridden socks and your self-righteous indignation. I will sue you, I said. I will tell the court. With what money? Mark asked. I canceled your credit cards this morning. I froze the joint checking account an hour ago. You cannot afford a lawyer. Olivia, you cannot even afford a taxi. He checked his watch. The Rolex Submariner on his wrist glinted in the television light. Speaking of which, he said, you need to leave. This is my home, I said. I paid the rent. I paid the bills. Correction, Mark said. I own this apartment. I bought it 2 months before we married. It is premarital property. It is in my name. You have been a guest here, a tenant who stopped paying rent. He walked to the front door and opened it. The cold air from the hallway rushed in. Get out, he said. Mark, please, I said. It is raining. It is 10 o'clock at night. I have nowhere to go. That sounds like a you problem. He said, maybe you can go sleep under a bridge. It is very frugal. Think of the savings. He picked up my purse from the hook by the door and threw it into the hallway. It skidded across the floor tiles. I am going to count to 10. Mark said, if you are not out, I am calling the police. I will tell them you are having a psychotic break and threatening me with a weapon. Given that you just threw an electronic device at my head, I think they will believe me. 1. I looked at him. I looked at the face I had loved. I saw nothing there but a black hole. 2. I ran to the bedroom. I grabbed my coat. I did not pack a bag. I did not take clothes. I did not take the photo of us from our wedding day. 3. I ran back to the living room. I looked at the grandmother's silverware chest on the sideboard. Do not even think about it. Mark said, that is collateral for the rent you owe me. 4. I looked at him one last time. I wanted to scream. I wanted to claw his eyes out, but I knew he was right about one thing. If the police came, he would win. He always won. He was the white male professional in a suit. I was the hysterical woman. I walked to the door. I stopped as I passed him. You will rot in hell for this, I said. Mark smiled. It was a genuine, happy smile. There is no hell, Olivia. There is only leverage, and I have all of it. He slammed the door in my face. I heard the deadbolt slide home, then the chain lock, then the second deadbolt. I stood in the hallway of the luxury building. The silence was absolute. I was wearing my coat and my house slippers. I did not have my keys. I checked my purse. My wallet was there. My phone was there. I opened my banking app. Balance, $0.00. Credit card. Account closed. I had nothing. 10 years of eating ramen. 10 years of freezing. 10 years of sacrifice. Gone. I walked to the elevator. My reflection in the polished brass doors looked like a ghost. I rode down to the lobby. The doorman, a man I had greeted every morning for 5 years, looked up from his desk. Good night, Mrs. Vance, he said cheerfully. Good night, Henry, I whispered. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the Seattle night. The rain hit me instantly, soaking through my thin slippers, chilling me to the bone. I stood on the sidewalk, watching the cars rush by. People were going home. People were going to warm beds. I looked up at our apartment window on the 12th floor. The light was still on. He was probably watching the rest of the documentary. He was probably pouring himself a glass of real wine now that the mule was gone. I started to walk. I did not know where I was going. I just knew I had to keep moving, or the cold would kill me. But as the rain washed over my face, mixing with the tears I finally allowed to fall, I realized something. He had taken my money. He had taken my home. He had taken my past. But he had made one mistake. He had let me walk out of there with my phone. And on that phone, in a secret email account he did not know existed, were 1,200 photos of tax fraud, embezzlement, and unreported assets. He thought he had stripped me of all my weapons. He thought I was naked and defenseless. He was wrong. I was not a mule anymore. I was a suicide bomber, and I was holding the detonator. The rain in Seattle does not wash things clean. It just makes the grime stick harder. I walked 4 miles that night. I walked until the blisters on my heels burst inside my soaked slippers, turning the white faux fur red with blood. I did not have enough battery on my phone to call an Uber, and even if I did, I had no valid credit card to pay for it. I ended up at a 24-hour diner near the University District. I sat in a booth with cracked red vinyl, shivering so violently that my teeth clacked together like dice in a cup. I ordered a cup of hot water with lemon because it was free. The waitress looked at my wet coat, my matted hair, and my shaking hands. She did not see a senior marketing manager. She saw a vagrant. She saw a woman who had lost the game of life. I used the last 5% of my battery to call Sarah. She picked up on the first ring. "I need help," I whispered. I did not have to say anything else. Sarah arrived 20 minutes later. She walked into the diner wearing pajamas under a trench coat. She did not ask questions. She did not lecture me. She simply wrapped her coat around my shoulders, paid the waitress $5 for the free water, and led me to her car. I slept on her sofa that night. I slept the sleep of the dead, a black, dreamless void born of exhaustion. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was shining. It was a cruel, bright light that exposed everything. I was wearing Sarah's oversized t-shirt. I smelled like rain and old sweat. I walked into her kitchen, expecting to feel safe. Sarah was sitting at her table, holding her phone. Her face was pale. She looked up at me, and her eyes were filled with tears. "Do not look at your phone, Olivia," she said. "Why?" I asked. My voice rasped. "Just do not. We need to focus on the legal strategy. We need to go to legal aid. We need to file an emergency motion for spousal support." I ignored her. I picked up my phone from the charger on the counter. I had 47 text messages. I had 12 missed calls. I had over 100 notifications from Facebook and LinkedIn. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I opened Facebook. The first thing I saw was a post from Mark. It was a long, heartfelt status update. He had posted a picture of himself sitting alone in our living room, looking devastated. It is with a heavy heart that I ask for privacy during this difficult time. The post read, "As many of you know, I have tried for years to help Olivia battle her demons. I stood by her through the spending addiction. I stood by her through the mental health crises. I forgave the debts she racked up in secret. But last night, after discovering her infidelity, she became violent. She attacked me in our home. For my own safety, I had to ask her to leave." I stopped reading. The room spun. Infidelity? Spending addiction? Violent? He had taken every single thing he had done to me, inverted it, and pinned it on my chest. He was projecting his sins onto me with the precision of a sniper. I scrolled down to the comments. These were people I knew. These were our friends. These were people I had cooked dinner for. These were colleagues I had recommended for jobs. "Stay strong. Mark, you are a saint for putting up with her this long. I always knew something was off with her. She always looked so unkempt while you were so put together. Infidelity? After everything he gave her? Disgusting. If you need a lawyer? Mark, let me know. Get a restraining order." I felt like I was being stoned to death in the public square. He had not just evicted me from the apartment. He had evicted me from society. He had painted a scarlet letter on my forehead before I even had a chance to speak. My phone pinged again. It was a notification from LinkedIn. I opened it. It was a direct message from the Vice President of Human Resources at my company. "Olivia, we have received some concerning reports regarding a domestic incident and potential criminal charges involving fraud. Per company policy regarding employees under investigation, we are placing you on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending further review. Please do not come to the office." I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the kitchen counter. He called my job. He did not just want a divorce. He wanted to annihilate me. He wanted to make sure I had no income. no reputation, and no allies. He knew that without a job, I could not fight him in court. He knew that without a reputation, no one would believe my story about his tax evasion. He was scorching the earth. Sarah picked up the phone and read the message. She closed her eyes and let out a long sigh. "This is classic," she said softly. "It is the textbook maneuver of a malignant narcissist. Isolate the victim, destroy their credibility, make them look crazy so that when they finally tell the truth, everyone thinks it is a delusion." She looked at me. "Olivia, you have to understand something. You are not fighting a husband anymore. You are fighting a terrorist." I sank onto a bar stool. I felt small. I felt dirty. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders. Millions of years of evolution told me that being cast out of the tribe meant death. And Mark had just convinced the tribe that I was diseased. "He wins," I whispered. "He has the money. He has the house. He has the narrative. Everyone believes him." Sarah walked around the counter and grabbed my shoulders. She shook me hard. "No," she said fiercely. "He has the opening move. That is all. He is loud. Olivia, he is arrogant. He thinks he has buried you, but he forgot one thing." "What?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "Seeds grow when you bury them," she said. She pulled out a legal pad and a pen. "We are not going to reply to the Facebook post. We are not going to beg for your job back yet. We are going to the Internal Revenue Service. We are going to the Forensic Accounting Division." She tapped the pen against the paper. "Mark Vance wants to talk about fraud? Fine. Let us talk about fraud. Let us talk about the $3 million in the Cook Islands. Let us talk about the shell companies he used to buy that boat for his mother." She looked at me, her eyes burning with a righteous fire. "He destroyed your reputation in the court of public opinion. We are going to destroy his reality in federal court. But first, you need to eat. You look like a skeleton." She made me eggs. I tried to eat, but the food tasted like ash. I kept thinking about the comments. She always looked so unkempt. Of course I looked unkempt. I was cutting my own hair with kitchen scissors to save $40. I was wearing clothes from Goodwill. I looked unkempt so he could look like a king. And now he was using my sacrifice as proof of my insanity. I walked to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. I saw the woman Mark had created. The scared, tired, frizzy-haired woman. I reached for the scissors in Sarah's medicine cabinet. I did not cut my wrists. I grabbed a handful of my thin, damaged hair, the hair that Mark had mocked, the hair that was not worth a Dyson. I cut it off. I chopped it all off, watching the long, brittle strands fall into the sink. I cut it until it was a short, sharp bob. It was not stylish. It was severe. It was the haircut of a woman who was done hiding. I looked at my reflection. My neck was exposed. My jawline was visible. I looked harder. I looked meaner. I walked back out to the kitchen. Sarah looked up and gasped. "I am ready," I said. I picked up my phone. I did not delete the app. I did not block Mark. I wanted to see every lie. I wanted to feel every insult. I wanted to let the rage fill me up until there was no room left for fear. Mark Vance thought he had thrown away a piece of trash. He was about to find out he had thrown a lit match into a powder keg. Sarah's law office was not a glass tower in the sky. It was a cluttered, hard-working suite in a brick building in Pioneer Square. We had been there for 6 hours. The desk was covered in empty Thai takeout containers and stacks of printed bank statements that Sarah had managed to subpoena through a rush order. The room smelled of pad thai and despair. Sarah rubbed her temples, her eyes red from staring at the dual monitors. "He is good, Olivia," she said, her voice heavy with fatigue. "He is really, really good. He has layered these accounts like an onion. Every time I peel back a shell company, there is another one inside. It will take me 6 months and $50,000 in forensic accounting fees to find the bottom. And we do not have $50,000. I sat in the client chair, staring at the ceiling fan, spinning slowly overhead. The rhythmic whoosh whoosh sound reminded me of the hairdryer I had bought, the hairdryer that started the war. "Wait," I said. I sat up straight. The memory hit me like a physical jolt. "The hairdryer, what about it?" Sarah asked, not looking away from the screen. "I bought it on a credit card," I said. "Sarah Sihil, Olivia, we know. We have the statements for your personal card. It is maxed out and frozen." "No," I said, shaking my head. "Not my personal card. When I bought the Dyson, my card was declined because I had hit the $500 limit Mark set for me. I panicked. I did not want the cashier to look at me with pity. So I used the emergency card Mark gave me 5 years ago." Sarah spun her chair around. "What emergency card?" "He called it the business ops card." I explained. "He gave it to me when he started his consulting limited liability company. He said I was an authorized user for tax purposes, but I was never, ever allowed to use it. He said if I used it, the Internal Revenue Service would audit us. But that day at the store, I was desperate. I swiped it. It went through. Mark never mentioned it because he probably has autopay set up and did not check the line items that month. He was too busy yelling at me about the principle of the purchase to check the source." Sarah's eyes went wide. "Do you have the number?" I closed my eyes. I had memorized it. I memorized everything Mark told me was forbidden. 4147. I recited. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. She logged into a credit reporting database. She typed in the partial number and my social security number, searching for authorized user accounts. "Got it," she whispered. She clicked a link. A statement popped up on the screen. Sarah began to read, her eyes scanning down the columns. Then she stopped. Her mouth opened slightly. "Oh my God," she breathed. "What?" I asked, leaning over the desk. "Olivia, this is not a business expense card. This is a lifestyle card." She turned the monitor toward me. I looked at the transactions. The Ritz-Carlton, Maui, Tiffany and Company, Porsche Leasing Services, Delta Private Jets. It was all there. Years of it. While I was clipping coupons for toothpaste, this card was racking up $30,000 a month in luxury expenses. "But that is not the smoking gun," Sarah said, her voice trembling with excitement. "Look at how the bill is paid." She pointed to the payment source column. "Payment from Vancorp Holdings, Cayman Islands." She looked at me, a savage grin spreading across her face. "He got sloppy, Olivia. He got arrogant. He paid a United States credit card directly from an offshore shell account." I did not understand. "What does that mean?" "It means he is bringing untaxed money back into the United States without declaring it," Sarah said. "It is money laundering. It is tax evasion. And because the card is in his name and the payments are automated, he cannot blame it on an accountant." She sat back, linking her fingers behind her head. "We have him." "How?" I asked. "Do we sue him?" Sarah shook her head. "No. If we sue him in civil court for divorce, he will hide, delay, and bury us in paperwork. He will spend every dime of that money on lawyers, just to make sure you get zero." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. We go nuclear. We go to the Internal Revenue Service. She pulled a form out of her drawer. It was marked Form 211. This is the application for award for original information. Sarah said, it is the whistleblower program. If you turn him in, and the Internal Revenue Service collects the unpaid taxes and penalties, they give you a percentage of the recovery, usually between 15 and 30%. I stared at the form. But if I turn him in, I said slowly, they will freeze everything. They will seize the boat. They will seize the accounts. They will take the Rolexes. Yes, Sarah said, he will lose it all. The money in the Cook Islands? Gone. The status? Gone. His job? Gone. He will go to federal prison. Olivia, tax evasion on this scale carries a sentence of 3 to 5 years minimum. She looked me in the eye, but you need to understand the cost. If the government takes everything, there is nothing left for you to sue for in the divorce. You will not get the millions. You will not get the alimony. You will get the whistleblower fee, which could take 2 years to process, and it might only be a few $100,000. She slid the pen across the desk toward me. So, here's your choice. We can try to blackmail him with this info. We can tell him to give you $2 million cash. Or we report him. He might pay it to stay out of jail. You walk away rich. Or, Sarah continued, her voice hard, you sign this paper. You burn him to the ground. You accept that you might walk away with almost nothing, just to make sure he has nothing either. I looked at the pen. I thought about the $2 million. It was a lot of money. It was security. It was the Portugal he had promised me. I could take the money, move away, and start over. I could be the rich divorcee. But then I thought about the ramen. I thought about the cold nights. I thought about the hole in my sock. I thought about the way he looked at me when he told me I was a bad investment. If I took the money, he would still be Mark Vance. He would still be the genius. He would still be the golden child. He would just be a little poorer. He would find another woman. He would find another mule. He would rebuild. He would win. Money was his god. If I took his money, I was just charging him a tax. But if I sent him to prison, if I stripped him of his suit, his title, and his freedom, if I made him sit in a concrete cell, eating food that tasted worse than expired beans, wearing a uniform that was not tailored, that was not a tax. That was an execution. I reached out and picked up the pen. The plastic felt warm in my hand. I do not want his money. Sarah, I said softly. I looked down at the form. Name of taxpayer, Mark Vance. I want his life. I signed my name at the bottom of the page. The ink flowed dark and permanent. Sarah watched me, a look of profound respect on her face. She took the paper and slid it into a folder. I will courier this to the Criminal Investigation Division in the morning, she said. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Mark was sleeping in our luxury bed, dreaming of his vineyard. He thought he was untouchable. He thought the world operated on logic and leverage. He forgot the variable of human rage. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. It was not happiness. It was the feeling of dropping a heavy backpack after a 10-mile hike. I did not care if I ended up waiting tables. I did not care if I lived in a studio apartment for the rest of my life. As long as he was in a cage, I was free. The radiator in my new apartment clanks. It is a rhythmic, metallic banging that wakes me up at 6 in the morning. I live in a studio apartment in Capitol Hill now. It is 400 square feet. The kitchen is just a hot plate and a mini fridge. The view out the window is not the sweeping skyline of downtown Seattle. It is a brick wall and a fire escape where a stray cat likes to sleep. It is small, it is loud, and it is the most beautiful place I have ever lived. It has been exactly 12 months since I signed the paper in Sarah's office. I did not get rich. That is the part of the movies they usually get wrong. When the federal government dismantles a financial crime, they eat first. The Internal Revenue Service descended on Mark's life like a swarm of locusts. They froze the accounts in the Cook Islands. They seized the boat on Lake Chelan. They confiscated the white Mustang convertible. They took every single Rolex, every humidor, and every tailored suit to auction off for pennies on the dollar to pay back the taxes and the penalties. I received a whistleblower award of $120,000 after taxes and Sarah's legal fees. I was left with enough to pay off my debts and put a deposit on this studio. I am back at zero. I am 35 years old, and I have the same net worth I had when I was 22. But Mark is in negative territory. He pleaded guilty 3 months ago. His high-priced defense team quit when his assets were frozen and he could no longer pay their retainers. He stood before a judge, wearing an orange jumpsuit that did not fit him, and listened to a sentence of 5 years in a federal penitentiary for tax evasion, wire fraud, and money laundering. I was there in the back of the courtroom. I needed to see it. I needed to verify that the monster was actually just a man. He looked back at me once. He looked smaller. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a bewildered terror. He looked like he was waiting for someone to step in and fix it. He was waiting for his parents. They never came. That was the final twist of the knife. And I admit, it gave me a dark satisfaction. As soon as the money stopped flowing, the unconditional love of the Vance family evaporated. Linda did not sell her Chanel bags to pay for his lawyer. Jason did not sell his jet ski to post bail. They cut him off. They called him a disgrace. They played the victims, claiming they had no idea their lavish lifestyle was funded by crime. Mark sat alone at the defense table. The golden child had been smelted down, and they realized he was just brass. I walked out of that courthouse, and I inhaled the air. It smelled of city exhaust and rain, but to me, it smelled like oxygen. Tonight is my 35th birthday. I am not eating ramen. I ordered a pizza with extra cheese and pepperoni. I bought a bottle of wine that cost $20. It is not expensive, but it is not vinegar. There is a box sitting on my bed. It arrived this afternoon. I saved up for 3 months to buy it. I put $10 away each week in a jar on my dresser. Not in an investment account, in a jar. I sit on the edge of the mattress and pull the lid off. The Dyson Supersonic stares up at me. It is pink. I chose pink because Mark hated pink. He called it a frivolous, childish color. I take it out of the box. It is heavy, solid, and sleek. I plug it into the wall outlet. I walk to the small, tarnished mirror above my dresser. I look at myself. My hair has grown out from the severe bob I chopped off a year ago. It is shoulder length now. It is healthy. It shines. I turn the machine on. The motor hums. It is a powerful, high-pitched whir. A stream of hot, controlled air blasts against my skin. I close my eyes. I think about the 10 years I lost. I think about the cold nights. I think about the expired beans. I think about the woman who begged for permission to buy this machine. The woman who believed she was not worth $600. That woman is gone. Mark said I was a bad investment. He said I was a liability. He was wrong. I was the correction. I run the dryer through my hair. The heat feels like a baptism. It blows away the shame. It blows away the gaslighting. It blows away the voice in my head that tells me I need to be smaller to be loved. I look at myself in the mirror. I see lines around my eyes that were not there before. I see a scar on my soul that will probably never fully fade. But I also see strength. I turn off the dryer. The silence in the room is peaceful. I did not get the Portugal villa. I did not get the millions. I spent 10 years eating ramen to buy a lesson that cost me everything I thought I had. But tonight, standing in a rented room, holding a pink hair dryer that I bought with my own money, I realized something profound. I own this machine. I own this room. I own my mistakes. And most importantly, I own my future. Mark is sitting in a cell, checking the time on a wall clock because he no longer has a watch. I am here. I smile at my reflection. It was an expensive lesson. But looking at the woman in the mirror, the woman I finally respect, I think it was a bargain. This story is not just about money. It is about the insidious nature of financial abuse. Mark did not hit Olivia with his fists. He hit her with spreadsheets. He used the concept of a shared future to rob her of her present. He weaponized logic to dismantle her intuition. Financial abuse is often invisible. It hides behind the guise of frugality, investment, and for the good of the family. But remember this, a partnership that requires you to erase yourself is not a partnership. It is a hostage situation. If you saw yourself in Olivia today, if you felt that familiar knot of anxiety when you spend your own money, please look closer at your reality. Freedom is not a number in a bank account. Freedom is the ability to make choices without fear. My question for you today is this: what is the price you are currently paying for your security? And is it costing you your soul?